Oh, it's not enough to do nothing. It's time for us to do something.
Well, good evening and welcome to Pellowe Talk. I'm Dave Pellowe. There is a lot happening in the world. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about tonight, I think I'm actually going to put back to wait on Thursday night when we do not Q&A and let the whole panel join in a bit. And that's all the goings on in Canberra lately with Scott Morrison really looking down the barrel of a minority government. But there's come to my attention, I've been monitoring news from Africa for several years now. About 3 years ago, I did an interview with a prominent South African thought leader who is actually very significant and is actually many years ago involved in planning, in charge of planning the state funeral for Nelson Mandela. He's somebody who's very much in the mainstream and very reputable. And ever since then, I've been involved in his private WhatsApp group and getting lots of updates on what's going on in the continent of Africa. And it came to my attention that there is an emerging humanitarian crisis going on in Mozambique, care of the Islamic State. And it's actually quite atrocious and quite horrific. And I don't know if the media aren't as concerned because it's not politically useful for their preferred narrative. I don't know if they're less concerned because the people being slaughtered are African. That's horrendous in either case. But I care, and I'm sure you care. And so I asked Simon Roche if he would join me again at short notice, and to my great delight, he was available. And so I can add Simon to the show right now. Simon, thank you very much for joining Pellowe Talk. It's great to be face-to-face again.
Yeah, it is great. Thank you very much for having Sightlanders, Dave.
Now, we might get into what Sightlanders is a little bit later, but tell me what kind of things, if you can just brief us, what's happening in Mozambique? Why should the international community be concerned? Describe the humanitarian crisis unfolding there now, please.
David, by no stretch of the imagination am I a strategist or a soldier. So I speak really as a layman. However, we've been monitoring this for going on 3 years with some people at the Army War College in Pennsylvania, United States of America. And we've been receiving on an ongoing basis very good information about what has been transpiring. So as a non-expert, I can kind of regurgitate it for your audience. And it runs something like this. About 3 years ago, during some setbacks in the ISIL or ISIS theater of operations in Syria, Iraq, and neighboring countries, an initiative was begun in the north of Mozambique. Now, South Africa is at the very southern tip of Africa, and going up the east coast, the Indian Ocean coastline, you then get Mozambique as our first neighbor, and our next neighbor is Tanzania. Now, Tanzania and northern Mozambique have for centuries had indigenous Muslim populations. They've always been there, although they have generally been regarded by the rest of the Islamic world as recalcitrant, as not very good Muslims, as sloppy Muslims. And so during this kind of hiatus in the ISIL activities, all of a sudden we began to see about 2.5 years ago, some kind of rumblings in the northernmost province of Mozambique, which is neighbors Tanzania to its north. The province is called Cabo Delgado. And this has coincided with the development by Total or Total, if you prefer, the energy and fuel giant, the French energy and fuel giant, the development by Total of Africa's largest ever infrastructure project, running at 20 billion United States dollars, which is very, very substantial.
Yes.
Mozambique has been generally recognized to be the poorest country in the world over the past 3 or 4 decades. Sometimes it changes places, to second to last or third to last. But the reality is you've got a quite simply dog poor country that all of a sudden discovers a liquefied natural gas field beyond anybody's imagination. Total comes in and starts developing it. And all of a sudden these ISIS type guys come in and they start causing trouble. And what it has led to, I'm skipping out a lot of details, which we can get into as we discuss, but to come to a point, what it has led to is that last Wednesday, the town of Palma was overrun initially by swordsmen. This has not been reported in any of the mainstream media, but we are following some very, very, very good sources that have always been reliable. Initially on the outskirts of the town of Palma, where Total's base of operations is, opposite this liquefied natural gas field, which is in the sea. It's some kilometers offshore. These guys came into town with swords, whirling them about their heads, and apparently they decapitated some people. Lo and behold, on Friday, an all-out attack was launched on the town. Now, the Mozambican forces have had years to prepare for this, but they're weak. It is a poor country, and the Mozambican forces are not worth, the breath that you describe them with. And so they've been overrun. And in the process, a number of expatriate workers were killed. One convoy of 17 vehicles managed to escape the encirclement of the town, during which 10 of the vehicles carrying expatriate workers, South Africans, Britons, French, Portuguese, Spanish, Italians, a number of Italians, 10 of the vehicles were lost altogether, and nobody knows where they are. Whether all of the occupants were killed, apparently there were about 50 people crammed into those 10 vehicles, and the other 7 vehicles made it out with the loss of 7 occupants shot dead as they were running the ambushes out of town. And that's about the gist of it, Dave.
So what I understand is that it started as Muslim youths, disgruntled, unemployed, and has actually grown into a significant, well-organized, well-armed fighting force, numbering perhaps over 1,000. Can you comment on that at all?
Some years ago, but quite a few years ago, I was in that region, and I had never met anybody up until, not so long ago, who had ever been there. The far north of Mozambique is like stepping back in time. There are no roads, no hospitals, no schools, no running water at all of any description, with no exceptions. Now, obviously, things have changed a little bit over time, but the point is disgruntled youths, 100% unemployment, starving goats, and fertile ground for the ISIS guys. So they came in with organization, they came in with skills and knowledge and experience, and they began a low-level insurgency infiltration about 3 years ago. And there's a lot more to tell. The Mozambicans hired some Russians called the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group came in to combat it, but they only had one helicopter, and then they accidentally bombed a Mozambican military convoy. There's been a whole series of episodes in this saga, but yes, you're right.
I'm just going to read a bit from this news article here, and that's on themercurynews.com, dated yesterday. Palma, maybe I should pronounce that. Palma is the center of a multi-billion-dollar investment by Total, the French-based oil and gas company, to extract liquefied natural gas, LNG, from offshore sites in the Indian Ocean. The gas deposits are estimated to be among the world's largest, and the investment by Total and others is reported to be $20 billion, one of the largest in Africa. No doubt that kind of development would be very good for one of the world's poorest nations. The battle for Palma forced Total to evacuate its large fortified site a few kilometres outside of the city. The fighting spread across the town on Monday, according to Lionel Dick, director of the Dick Advisory Group. That's DYCK. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that too simply. A private military company contracted by the Mozambican police to help fight the rebels. Quote, "There is fighting in the streets in pockets across town," Dick told the Associated Press. The Dick Group has several helicopter gunships in Palma which have been used to rescue trapped civilians and fight the rebels. Quote, "My guys are airborne and they've engaged several little groups and they've engaged one quite large group," Dick said. "They've landed into the fight to recover a couple of wounded policemen. We've also rescued many people who were trapped, 220 people at last count. That's a good rescue job." He said those rescued were taken to Total's fortified site on the southern African country's Afungi Peninsula, where chartered flights flew many south to Pemba, the capital of Cabo Delgado province. The rebels are well armed with AK-47 automatic rifles, RPD and PKM machine guns and heavy mortars, Dick said. Quote, "This attack is not a surprise. We've been expecting Palma to be whacked the moment the rain stopped and the fighting season started, which is now," he said. "They've been preparing for this. They've had enough time to get their ducks in a row. They have a notch up in their ability. They're more aggressive. They're using mortars," end quote. He said many were wearing black uniforms. Continuing quote, "There've been lots of beheadings. Right up on day one, our guys saw the drivers of trucks bringing rations to Palma and their bodies were by the trucks. Their heads were off." He said it's not going to be easy for the Mozambican government to regain control of Palma. Simon, is this something the international community can do anything to help about? ISIS have got control of this strategic town in Mozambique.
Well, it's going to be very difficult for the international community. That report, by the way, is probably the best mainstream report that I've read or heard. And it's not being covered as well by other sources. The simple reality is that it is a Muslim environment. The people there are Muslims. So there's a large degree of sympathy. There's a large degree of, even though the people are poor, support in the sense that if you come to me as a like-minded person, I might hide you in my house, or I might give you a handful of mealie meal, whatever the case may be. Rooting people out of an environment in which is inherently sympathetic is going to be very difficult.
Yeah, yes, indeed. I don't know if you can lower your camera at all, just point it down a little bit. I saw you had a little bit of difficulty there before.
Yeah, I did. I don't know what happened there, Dave. I'm going to just have to struggle on, I'm afraid. That's
okay. That was pretty good. We're used to rolling with the punches on our show. Anita Maguire, one of the people watching, says it was disgusting how our immigration minister, Peter Dutton, was treated for wanting to give white South Africans refugee status. And that wasn't because they were white, of course. It was because they were being ethnically targeted for violence and probably culturally compatible, easily integrated is probably the right reason and motivation to give him there. And yeah, he was labelled as a racist for that. Yeah, that was, I think that was something that Sightlanders had a little bit of help, if not a lot of help in helping Peter Dutton actually get that the information about what's emerging in South Africa.
Yeah, that's correct. I don't know what I'm allowed to say yet. Nobody's told me that it's okay to speak. So I'm going to keep my mouth stum, as it was at the time that we provided whatever help we provided. I'd like to briefly mention two things to you, Dave, that you may find of interest. Recently, about perhaps 6 weeks ago, the farm murder statistics for 2020 were released, and they are 1.5 times what they were the previous year. So for anybody who's been following this farm murder story, in spite of the fact that farmers are now taking precautions that are beyond your imagination, including keeping wild lions, not tame lions, wild lions in their farmyards through special camp systems and all sorts of fortifications, and you can't imagine it. In spite of that, the number of murders of farmers, of owners of farmers, this is over and above the rape of the wives, the slitting of the throats of the daughters, and so on and so forth, has increased by just short of 1.5 times in the year 2020. Secondly, I'd like to mention that about 4 weeks ago, the figures for the year 2020, again, 1st of January, 31st of December, for the immigration of wealth of South Africa were released. And almost 10% of South Africa's dollar millionaires left South Africa in the year 2020. Just about 9.5, 9.6, 9.7%. Now, for anybody who understands maths and stats, that's beyond a phenomenon. If 10% of the dollar millionaires of Australia were to leave Australia in 1 year, it would be a totally different place. So, just picking up on your observation, there's a lot going on here, and it's not good.
So let's just say a little bit longer on Mozambique. We will come back to South Africa. That's obviously your home ground. But that was a good comment, Anita. Thank you. Yeah, it was disgusting the way Dutton was treated. But what do we expect? The lying harlot media, no friends of the truth, and certainly no friends of conservative government. So in Mozambique, you said you've been in discussions with a war college in Philadelphia, did you say?
Pennsylvania, yes.
Sorry, I knew it started with P and was in America. Could have been Pittsburgh, but Pennsylvania. And that was 3 years ago. Is there something like this has been obviously foreseen and warned about? What should have the international community, the United Nations, do you think there's anything they should have done to help the Mozambique national government to properly prepare and defend their civilians against this injustice?
Dave, I'm not sure, because it's difficult to know where to draw the line regarding sovereign interests. Should the foreign forces have started to meddle or to get involved, is perhaps a better way of putting it, 3 years ago when it was nascent and just beginning? Should they have gotten involved 2 years ago, a year ago, 6 months ago? I don't know. Initially, the Mozambican government employed a group called the Wagner Group, a mercenary group called the Wagner Group. They then left over non-payment and the bombing of a Mozambican army convoy, accidental bombing. So then they employed Lionel Dick and his son Max Dick of the Dick Advisory Group, which is not really a South African company. It's a Zimbabwean company with very, very, very strong ties to the Zimbabwean government. The Dick Advisory Group struggled a little bit, so they then managed to get hold of some Gazelle helicopters, and they kitted them out very well. If any of your listeners have a very deep interest in this kind of thing, they can have a look at the website caliberobscura.com. Caliberobscura.com. It's arguably the world's leading website on this field of endeavor, monitoring what weapons are going into and out of various places. So the Dick Advisory Group kitted them up as best they could according to the amount of money that they were being paid. They did a reasonably decent job. And we hear now that 3 days ago, they have been supplemented by a force of Ukrainian guys. We know very little about it. It's almost conjecture and hearsay at this point in time. However, it's worth noting that the sources that are telling us this are impeccable sources, brilliant sources. So, should the international community have gotten involved? I don't know. There have been lots of guys involved for quite some time. It hasn't made a difference. Now it's getting serious. It's threatening a $20 billion project. Should the United Nations offer help at this stage? Should they hold back a little bit? Should the Mozambicans take more responsibility? I'm not dead clear in my own mind what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah, sure. I guess we could talk about it and speculate, but even if you're in my opinions on imperialistic intervention in other nations aside, I assume Mozambique's a member of the United Nations, and the United Nations is there to essentially protect and preserve the status quo of legitimate governments. And certainly Islamic State terrorist insurgencies rebelling against the government would seem to be in the purview of what Mozambique would expect, as a membership benefit.
Yeah, I don't know if they've made an appeal to the United Nations or to the Security Council, for that matter, whether they've asked for the help or not. It's a good question, and I can't say I've seen any evidence one way or the other.
I guess what I'm worried about is that we're not going to. I don't want to see another situation like the Rwandan genocide, where the United Nations saw it all happening, had observers on the ground, could have intervened, and they just sat on their hands to bureaucratically pass the buck until it was all too late and millions of people have died. Again, philosophically, I don't know if that's something we're obliged to, as foreigners, as military capable foreigners, obliged to intervene in, especially uninvited. I think that's probably clear. If not invited, then no. But there's something individually in me which wants to save a million lives where we can, and what's gone on in Syria and wherever ISIS goes, they're a cancer and so damaging and toxic for the life and vibrancy and flourishing of a nation.
It's the eternal Christian dilemma, isn't it, Dave? I mean, it is almost the central pillar of Christian conscience. When is love tough? When is it too tough? And when is it not tough enough? Gentle Jesus, meek and mild.
We don't want to confuse that justice and that defense of the innocent and the vulnerable. We don't want to confuse that defense compassion with a imperialistic imposition of what's ultimately just a democratic culture versus a more violent, less democratic culture.
The thing is, though, that in Africa and in the Muslim world, those two things are confused. They are really fused together, like two soldered wires. And they struggle to discern between the two, and perhaps rightly so. Honestly, my sympathies tend more towards them than the historic disposition, our historic disposition, whether it be in Vietnam or Korea or wherever the case may be. We could argue about this stuff all day long. But Africans are very hesitant to have foreigners on their shores. And Muslims are very hesitant to see what they regard as crusaders on their shores. And then there's a third consideration here. The north of Mozambique, not only this northernmost province of Cabo Delgado, where the town of Pellowe is found and where this liquefied natural gas project is found, but the general north of Mozambique was historically the preserve of Renamo. During the Mozambican Civil War for many years, the one civil war, the one force, the one actor was, completely occupied the north. Do they want to see a balance of power tipping at all? Foreigners coming in, perhaps them being sidelined, Mozambican forces using the foreigners as a Trojan horse to take over this region as big as most countries in Europe, and to leave them on the sidelines. I think that there are, I suspect, I don't know for certain, but I suspect that there are many Mozambicans who frankly don't want the clean water and democracy of the West in this picture.
Well, that would make it easier to answer the question, what should we do? if they don't want the help, if they would rather ISIS than the West, I think, look, I'm just opining here. I don't know that I'm right or wrong. Happy for commenters watching to chime in, but I think they have the right to self-determination. That's clear. And if they prefer ISIS over Western democracy, freedom, and development, I think that's their right to make that choice. We don't have to like it or agree with it. But I think it's important that the offer is there, and certainly that the compassion and awareness is there. And just
there's so much
money isn't a problem, isn't a solution, because we know that's not going to get where it needs to go.
Well, there's so much to weigh up here, Dave. There's a $20 billion project on the go, and doubtless, even with however much corruption, it is going to have some benefit for the people in the immediate vicinity and in the larger state of Mozambique. So do you say, well, these guys have a right to self-determination, therefore we're not going to meddle there? If they want to put a stop to the work of Total, let them do it. What about all of the babies in one of the poorest countries in the world who won't get adequate nutrition because of the taxes that are not forthcoming to the Mozambican government? You will remember, Dave, you're on, if I may say so, I hope that this doesn't sound sort of aloof, but you're on a very elite group. That WhatsApp group to which you alluded earlier has got members of the European Parliament, German Parliament, the Bundestag, you name it, very, very senior people in the Pentagon and so on it. And I posted some videos last year.
You'll have to arrange some interviews for me.
Well, yeah, the point being that we're corresponding at a fairly high level. It wasn't just bragging. There's a real point to it. We're corresponding at a very high level on this matter. And last year, you'll recall that I posted some videos with warning notices saying, if you're a sensitive Christian, don't watch this. But for those of you for whom it is relevant to see the severity of the matter, for whom it is pertinent and germane, have a look. And I posted videos of women being raped and then murdered in Mozambique in this conflict. They were absolutely heart-rending. Yes. Now, do I, as a Christian, have a moral obligation to interfere in your domestic affairs for the sake of your wife, whether you like it or not, because you're beating her to a bloody pulp? Or must I keep out of your house? What I'm saying to you is that the dilemma is beyond me. I don't have a good, clever, straight answer for you.
Look, it's an excellent thought problem, thought experiment, and I think I can answer that fairly directly, and I think that, and I'll probably, let me inverse it, and that is, where is it my problem? Where is it my responsibility? And I'm going to take my lead from Scripture, but I think it also makes sense in the world to somebody who doesn't consider the Bible an authority. But from the Bible, it says we are to care for those strangers and foreigners furthest away from us. But it also says that the person who fails to look after his own house is worse than an unbeliever. And so I think there's a clear distinction with orders of proximity, so that the closer somebody is to my house, the more I'm responsible for them. And I'm less responsible for people far away from me, but not lacking compassion. I still care. And with whatever's available to me to help, I should. And I think that also works when we talk about authority. It's my right first, before government, before anybody else. It's my responsibility and my God-given authority to look after the people in my own house and make sure that in my house there's justice and there's peace, and that there's welfare. And then for my neighbours, I don't have any authority there, but certainly if I heard, help, stop hitting me, I'm scared, somebody call the police, then it's my responsibility to bring in the authorities. There's a degree of responsibility there. Now, if that was in another nation, I don't think there's any authority there unless invited. I've got deep concern and compassion, like you said. It's horrific and it breaks my heart, and I want to do something. But I think there's a boundary there that says if your people have a choice, if your nation has a choice, and they say no, thank you to that help, I think the offer should be made. Practical help should be offered, and if and we have to trust that there's a lot that we can do for prayer. And I feel that sorry for people who don't have that option. But yeah, it's not a simple solution. But that's my take on it. A little 5 second or 5 minute maybe.
Look, there's some people would say that the sovereign state is everything, and if the sovereign state of Mozambique appeals for help, then there's an obligation in the Brotherhood of Nations to assist its fellow. And then there are, of course, those people who would say that that faith has primacy, or religion has primacy. The Muslims of that vicinity are very clear in their minds. The last thing that they want is crusaders. So do you give the state primacy, the state of Mozambique, or do you give those very people there who don't want any foreigners, end of story, and who want a caliphate according to their consciences above all things? I should mention to you, for those of your viewers who have an interest in this, that the theater of endeavor in this story, that is to say the very south of Tanzania and the northernmost province of Mozambique, are strongly connected to the ISCA, Islamic State in Central Africa, which is based around Kivu in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. Now, these guys clearly have ambitions of expanding. They're not going to stop. And their faith dictates very, very simply. I listened to a thing on BBC Radio 4, and anything on BBC Radio 4, errs on the side of political correctness. Just recently, in which an Oxford Don spoke about the expansion of Islam across Africa. And he said the reason why it was the most successful proselytizing of any faith in history is because it was done by the sword. End of story. So now where do you draw the line? Where do you say these guys in northern Mozambique may not expand their caliphate any further because the people on the periphery, the next bunch of people that they're going to convert, don't want it? And where do you say, well, Islam, it's a religion of peace, they're entitled to do what they like? They converted North Africa. St. Augustine came from Hippo. St. Augustine was a North African. It was a Christian environment. Egypt was a Christian environment. Lebanon was a Christian environment. Syria, a Christian environment. Asia Minor, Turkey, the letters of St. Paul to the churches, those were to Christians in a Christian world. The Muslims came along and said, we're not having any of this. Our swords are bigger than yours, and we're going to chop your heads off, and you can't stop us. 100 years later, or 1,000 years later, does anybody complain? No, the issue went away. So the reality is that it is a near intractable dilemma that is probably only going to be resolved by self-interest. That is to say, Total is going to apply whatever pressure it has to apply to ensure that the United States of America, Pakistan, Uzbek, you name it, that they come there with whatever forces are required to suppress the uprising. Then on the other hand, they will do what they always do, is that they will give a $500 million donation to the head of the local tribes, and he will, in the African patronage stereotype, he will allow it to filter downwards to the people around him, and there will be an effective balance reached at some point. But until that point is reached, the competing forces are going to endeavor to take as much ground as they can, so that when it comes to that point of, the final showdown and the final bribe, they're in the strongest position.
Yeah. Now, a question I've got for you, and you may not have the foggiest idea how to answer this, so feel free to say, I don't know. How much influence, I think the biggest concern right now in the world is not Islamic terrorism and the expansion of IS, but China. How much Marxist politics is there existing in Mozambique that is friendly to IS? And what's China's influence there, if you know it all?
David, the ingress of China into Africa is far greater than is being reported by the average mainstream media. I can tell you stories that will, be difficult for you to believe. The Chinese are going wherever they can get food that they can't produce at home, and wherever they can get strategic resources that they can't produce at home. I live in a region which provides about over 4/5 of the world's manganese, and not far from a region that provides, well, in 2005, provided 100% of the world's chrome. And we see the trucks passing here every day getting more and more and more and more and more and more. There's a consumption of resources being undertaken by China now, which was recently covered on Zero Hedge, in which the author did a scholarly job of proving, I'd like to use the word proving because it was very scholarly, that China is consuming resources at a rate that has hitherto only been seen throughout all of history in times of warfare. It is consuming 3 times the amount of resources or buying up 3 times the amount of resources that it can possibly consume. So I don't want to get into whether China is preparing to start World War III, but I do make the point that China is voraciously and rapaciously taking whatever it can right now. It is present in Mozambique, present in Tanzania, heavily present in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, so present in Zimbabwe that the Chinese have placed S-200 missile systems around some of its mining interests in Zimbabwe. Now, whether it thinks that those mines are going to be, susceptible to an airborne invasion from Malawi, or what it is that they had to put S-200 missile systems there, I have no idea. But it indicates to you the level of interest, the level of fanatical interest and jealous protection being exercised by them.
What do you think of this? A commenter by the name of Oh Captain, My Captain says the Mozambique government does not want stability in the north because they despise Renamo, the anti-communist movement up there. Are you familiar with that? You got any comments on that?
Yeah, that's probably a fair comment. I wouldn't say that it's 100% accurate, but I'd say it's about as fair and intelligent as anything else anybody's going to say on this very muddy, murky subject. The Mozambican government is historically Marxist. The Renamo is historically not. But Renamo would sell its grandmother. I don't think ideology is really at the end of the day what it's all about. And the same applies to the Mozambican ostensibly Marxist government.
Rightio. Now, here we go. All right, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping now. Want to actually share with our viewers this photo. You may remember that on Not Q&A last week, we talked about Alexandra Marshall, one of the regular Good Source commentators, and about her house being wiped out and destroyed in the floods. Well, this is her library. It's now rubbish in the back of a trailer. The kind of ideology we normally fight is infamous for burning books and cancel culture. But in this case, Ellie Melly's books have been flooded and drowned. So that's something that we want to help rectify as the Good Source supporters and community. So if you can help, please head to goodsource.news/Marshall and do what you can to donate to that worthy cause. There's been many generous people already. We're approaching $500 in donations that are going to be going towards Ellie Melly to rebuild her library with secondhand books to try and make that go as far as possible. And she needs those to be able to do the research for all the writing that she does so wonderfully for The Good Source and Spectator and so many other good conservative outlets here in Australia and around the world. So if you're listening, that web address once more where you can go and chip in $5, $10, $50, and there's some people who've been much more generous than that, is goodsource.news/Marshall. And thank you very much for that. And to the Good Source supporters who help us out every week and every month generously to keep this kind of independent, honest media coming to you. Simon, let's kick into South Africa, your backyard. And I've got a provocative comment here from one viewer that I'm sure you might take some exception to. And it might not be sympathetic, but it might just be observational. Bo James Heyman says, many people are of the opinion, sorry, this comment's blocking your face at the moment, it's in the lower half of the screen. Bo says, many people are of the opinion that white South Africans get what they deserve for the Dutch invasion of South Africa. How can we expect world government intervention when this is the opinion on the ground? Morality has left most of these countries. So he might not be sympathetic with that opinion, but he says many people are of the opinion that white South Africans are the invaders and deserve to be expelled. I think the word is expropriation without compensation.
Yeah. Well, it's a contentious thing, Dave. Where do you draw the line? Shall we begin with the forced conversion of North Africa? That seems like a nice place to begin. It's not too far, not 3,000 years ago, but not too recently either. So let's take back North Africa for Christianity.
1,500 years ago?
Exactly, not quite, but close enough. 1,300 years ago. Let's take that back for Christianity, and then we talk about the next matter. I think the next matter that we should talk about is the East African slave trade. Now, the West African slave trade, that is to say, to the Americas, to South America and the Caribbean mostly, and to a very small extent, statistically speaking, the total numbers involved was something like 11 million. Something like plus or minus, give or take, 11 million. So let's do this. We'll get on to the East African slave trade in a second. That 11 million, we first address it with the Africans that captured those slaves. Then the Muslims who traded in them. Then the Jews, over 60%. This is a little known fact. It's well substantiated, well recorded fact. Then the Jews who transported them, because the overwhelming majority of the ships that transported the slaves to the Americas were owned by Jews. It was a sphere of endeavor that was heavily dominated by Jews. Right. Then we go to the East African slave trade. Now, the reason why there are no descendants to be found of black Bantu type people in the East, the Arabian Peninsula, is because all of those slaves were castrated. The males were castrated at the moment they got off the boat. Let's settle those matters, and then we'll whine about Louisiana. I don't know where we start and where we begin this thing. In 1652, the Dutch established a trading station on the 6th of April, 1652 in South Africa. The first proper black people were encountered by a man called Captain Robert J. Gordon, who worked for the Dutch East India Company in December of... And where was this, sorry? This is in South Africa. So right. That we established a colony in 1652. In 1777, early 1778, 125 years later, can you look me in the eyes and tell me that it took 125 years for the first white American settlers to meet Red Indians? Or that it took the Australians 125 years to meet Aborigines? This is recorded. This is fact. You don't have to like it, but it remains the truth. Meaning that comfortably 40% of South Africa had not yet been settled by the tribes, the black tribes descending from Central Africa. This is a well-known recorded science. So we're getting what we deserve. Can we also have the 40% where we don't deserve it without problems? You know what this is like? I don't know if you have this in Australia, but in South Africa, whenever there's a big motor race at Monza or a World Cup rugby, World Cup soccer, whatever, the Coca-Cola and our big telephony providers have competitions where you can win 4 days in Monza in a 5-star hotel by scratching under the lid of a Coca-Cola bottle. When you watch the race, you and your woman, the whole lot, two front row seats. I feel like I just won 2 front row seats in the same way to the finals of the World Stupidity competition, to the World Championships of Stupidity, is that comment that you just featured by Bo Baden or whatever his name is. Bless him, but he's dumb.
Yeah, he was not actually sympathizing with it. He was just observing. That's what some people on the ground think. And I think you've actually, look, I've certainly come across people since talking to you where I say, oh, you know, things are bad in South Africa, and they're white South Africans, and they know, or they claim to know, nothing about it. I think you've explained in other interviews that there is maybe a large percentage of white South Africans who are either unaware or just disagreeing that there's any problem at all.
Well, you know, Dave, it is a phenomenon, or we believe it's a phenomenon. We white South Africans tend to believe that when our brothers, I have a brother who's overseas, I had another brother who was overseas for 10 or 15 years, they tend to forget about South Africa. It's a funny thing. Maybe it's scientific, maybe it's not scientific, I don't know. But let me give you a brief illustration. Our police force has just lost legal access to its own central firearms registry.
What?
So the police force is, under law, not entitled to know who owns firearms. These are separate events, but they've occurred.
But it's their registry. It's their registry, and they're not allowed to access it. So who does access it is the question.
The people who designed the software who weren't paid. The DNA database of South Africa is no longer functional. Meaning, you may or may not know, Dave, that the statistic, there's an organization called People Opposed to Women's Abuse, which is the leading activist organization in South Africa concerning gender-based violence, and they work very closely in conjunction with scholars, universities, and so on. And they say that the percentage of women who will be raped once in their lifetime is 35%. Then there are others, more, who will be raped twice, thrice, 4 times, and so on. Right. Yeah. So in order to prosecute those crimes, obviously DNA is a vital, vital thing. Otherwise, it's he said, she said. The DNA database of the Republic of South Africa at the moment does not exist, is not functional at all. Not slightly, a little bit. Simon's a wild, racist, right-wing exaggerate. No, not at all. No rape cases. 35 out of 100 women in South Africa will be raped once in their lives. Not one at the moment of those cases can be prosecuted. So I'm very pleased for all the white South Africans living in Perth and Wellington and Toronto, believe that there's not that much going on in South Africa. God bless you. May you live a peaceful life, but you're an idiot. You know, I told you that last year, almost just short of 10% of all of the dollar millionaires in South Africa left South Africa. Left. You must know that when the most capable, competent, brightest, competitive, the best of the gene pool are running away at 10% a year, that there is something wrong, regardless of what people in Sydney, you know, who were formerly from Boksburg, what they may think. God bless them. The general evidence.
What's the possibility of what's the possibility of white South Africans who are still residents in South Africa not knowing about the farm massacres and other dysfunctionalities going on in South Africa right now? Is there such a sheltered lifestyle possible where there's nothing wrong with their internet, their electricity, or their crime statistics?
Yeah, absolutely. I know many of them, many of them. Blood family by marriage. Many people who don't want to know this stuff. My mother said to me not so long ago, we were talking about there's a big problem with pensions over the past 5 years, as it has recently been demonstrated on, I believe, the 16th of October, 10th or the 16th of October last year, by a man called Magnus Haystack, who is a partner with the Oppenheimers in a company called Brenthurst Wealth. In other words, he's a supremely competent man who works with the wealthiest, cleverest, sharpest people in the world. Demonstrated that all pensions in South Africa, bar none, lost 30 to 40% of their value over the past 5 years. Now, if I chat to my mom about that and say, Mom, be a little bit careful. Mommy, think about this. Mom, you and Dad are reaching a certain age now. Mom, you must chat to my other brother. He's so good at this kind of thing. Let him help you, but just be aware. Her answer to me is, Simon, I would rather stick my head in the ground like an ostrich than deal with what is happening in the country at the moment. I had a similar, not the same, but a similar conversation with my father. And he said to me, Simon, my father is a pious man, maybe the most pious man I know, who never uses the name of God in vain, who never says things lightly. He said to me, Simon, if I thought about the things that you thought about all day, I would commit suicide. There's no possible way that I could cope with it. I spoke to one of my brothers about this stuff. A nice conversation, a pleasant conversation, not hectoring, not haranguing, just nice, easy conversation. And phoned him about 2 weeks later and said to him, hey, how's it going? He said to me, look, I don't want to talk to you. He said, for 3 nights, I didn't sleep after our conversation. He said, it's not that I only slept 10 minutes or half an hour, an hour. He said, for 72 hours, I was awake. I could not sleep in terror. Please don't tell me anymore. The reality is the general evidence database has lost over 8 million pieces of evidence. Okay, so there are 8 million pieces of evidence that the police would use for prosecuting crimes that have been lost. I'm sorry about my camera, Dave. And they have a backlog of over 6 months of 172,000 crimes. It is bad, Dave. It's not good. The Presidential Financial Advisory Committee advised our president in September of last year that he must prepare to renege on his foreign loans, that the time is coming now where we won't be able to pay the World Bank. You know what happens? You know what happened with Argentina. You're of a certain age. You've seen these things happen. For the first time in 56 years, our army didn't have an intake this year. These are not small things.
Wow, that's huge. That's crazy. Are you able to try and fix your camera while we're still talking?
I can't do both at once, unfortunately, Dave. I'm really very sorry. Oh, there we go.
That's okay. I'm actually just trying to bring up a picture of you, or the thumbnail of the show, to do it as well. Hang on, I've got a picture of you in my background there on the screen. But I'm
very sorry about this, Dave. I can't explain it to you. It's the first time it's ever happened.
Just go back down again, closer towards your desk, so we can get your head above the comments that we're pulling up every now and then. A bit more. There we go. Perfect. That's great. Awesome. Well, I actually, maybe this is an odd topic, an odd place to start, but let's actually try and wrap up the hour with some documentation or some listing from you of what are the dysfunctionalities going on in South Africa at the moment. And I know you're not given to hyperbole, but for those people who are in denial or just in ignorance and they've never heard that there's a problem in South Africa, in the promotion and description for this video, I I described it as a galloping or hurtling towards becoming a failed state. What are the things going on in South Africa at the moment that never were a problem before, but are fast becoming unignorable to the point of South Africa collapsing as a functional democracy?
Well, for instance, the electricity supply is becoming more and more and more erratic. And people may find this interesting. South Africa has an installed electricity generation capacity of between 45,000 and 47,000 megawatts. It depends how you count it. Let's give the benefit of the doubt and call it 45,000. South Africa's peak draw is just under 25,000 megawatts. So in other words, we should have at any given time 20,000 megawatts spare. So when people read in the newspapers, maybe viewers of yours in Australia who keep up with South African news, when they read that South Africa is 5,000 megawatts short, in other words, that it's only developing at a certain point in time 19,000 megawatts, it doesn't mean that 5,000 megawatts is not available. It means that 26,000 megawatts of 45,000 is not available. So the electricity crisis in South Africa is in fact enormous. Over 50% of the generation or the development capacity is not functional. 2 weeks ago, the city of Johannesburg and its water reticulation partners, namely Rand Water and Joburg Water, announced that they would implement cuts of 45% due to non-payment, not non-payment necessarily by the consumers of the water, but the people through whom they pay. So what happens is you, David, use a certain amount of water every month. You've got to get it to the water authority at the top of the mountain, whoever they are in your area, and you pay through somebody. That money is being stolen so wholesale that they started cutting water. So in 1 week, 2 weeks ago, we had a situation where 45% of the water of 13% of Africa's economy, 13% of Africa's economy is found just in Johannesburg and surrounds, the little mini state of Gauteng, the mini province of Gauteng. 45% of the water and a meaningful amount of the electricity was not being provided because of the theft of funds. Now,
do you mean the taps are just turned off? There's nothing in the taps when they turn the tap on. That 45% of the town has no water at all. Not just 45% of the dam to go around everybody, but the taps are dry in 45% of the town.
How they do it is they reduce the pressure by 45%. So in theory, you can get 55% of what you used to be able to get out of your taps, which is not the end of the world, except that in some cases, in areas that lie in the wrong height, I'm not a water engineer, but I read an article about this, they get none at all. There were about 20 regions of Johannesburg, not mere suburbs, but regions of Johannesburg or greater Johannesburg that go no water at all, because at the best of times, their pressure is not very great. So when it's reduced overall by 45%, they get none at all. You know, the ambulance service, the state ambulance service.
Sorry, before you go on to the ambulance service, you said the money to pay for the water is being stolen. So somebody's tried to pay for the water. Is it the government that's tried to pay for the water? And how does the money get stolen?
There is a direct equivalent in the village in which I live. I'm coming to you from the village of Fund, which is on the Funderkloof Dam on the Orange River, which is more or less in the center of South Africa, if anybody wants to take a look on Google Maps or Google Earth. In our village, we have what's known as penalty power, meaning that our power gets cut off because the electricity provider hasn't received its money. What happened was that we paid our money. I as a consumer, I pay my money, I pay for the electricity I use, That money gets passed on to the African National Congress authorities. The authorities then keep the money. And they stole about 50 million just for electricity. But they have no money to put chlorine in the water. And because we're on the rim of a dam, obviously we lie higher. The houses are higher than the dam, obviously. So the way the sewerage works is that it runs downhill because it requires gravity to go out of your flushing toilet and out of your garden and so on. It has to run downhill. So it runs down almost to the rim of the dam and then gets pumped back uphill from a central point or a number of central collection points to the sewerage farm. There is no money for diesel, for the generators, for those pumps, meaning that the sewage has been running out of the sewerage pipes, out of the manholes, into the dam. This is one of the largest dams in the whole of Africa. It's 100 kilometers long. The dam wall is 99 meters high to the water and 110 or 112 meters high altogether. It's an edifice. It's like the Hoover Dam. It's like the Aswan High Dam. It's enormous. This is being fed whenever there is penalty power. In other words, whenever our power is cut off, because we paid the money, but it was stolen by the ANC, and the sewage cannot be pumped through the sewerage system. There's no diesel for the standby generators. It runs into the dam. This is real life in the real world, Dave. People can say whatever they like. There's untold evidence of it.
So you pay for your water bill to go to, you pay the ANC, the government? Is it the ANC or the ANC is the government?
We pay the governmental structures. And in theory, the state and the party are not the same thing. In Australia, the state and the party are not the same thing. Right. But in an effective one-party state where the opposition is very, very minor and where the overwhelming majority of municipalities and provinces and national, where everything is controlled by one party, it is tantamount to the ANC stealing. There's no point me saying in the spirit of crystal clear honesty that it was the municipality that stole it, when it was a cabal of ANC deployed people that stole the money. And what do they do with the money?
Do they just line their own pockets and build their houses and buy boats with it? Or what are they doing with the money?
Yeah, exactly. I have a woman who comes and cleans for me, and because I'm a bachelor, so it's a necessity. I'm embarrassed to say, but it's the truth. And she has a twin sister who cleans for somebody else on the same day, and she pops in here in the afternoon to collect her sister who works for me, and the two of them go off together. And one day, my cleaner told me that our municipal manager spent $91,000 on the first birthday party of his illegitimate daughter, his girl, not his wife's children, his girlfriend's child. So I said to her, that's impossible. That's an exaggeration. It's an absolute exaggeration. She said to me, we heard it from the child's mother. She was bragging about it around town. So I when her sister arrived to pick her up for them to carry on home, she called her sister and said, I'm not going to tell you what I've just told him. You tell him. How much did this guy, a municipal manager, man, a clerk practically. We used to call them town clerks. What did he spend on his sideline marriage's child's first birthday? And she said quite promptly, $91,000. So yes, that's exactly what they do. We pay the money in for the water and electricity that we use and for the services and what have you, and then they steal it. For some time, we didn't have a rubbish collection truck here.
So sorry, that's 91,000 Rand?
91,000 Rand.
Which is about $8,000 Australian, I think.
Which is about $8,000, but in terms of purchasing power parity, it's not, because we pay a lot less for an apple than you do.
Okay.
It's probably closer to $15,000. Exchange rates are artificial after all. If the South African Rand dropped by 1,000,000% tomorrow, wouldn't actually mean that the Australian dollar had somehow gotten miraculously stronger. So
Sure.
it's inaccurate to go by the exchange rate. In terms of PPP, about $15,000.
Andre Nepkin says, as a South African, I can assure you that he is not exaggerating. In reality, the decline is horrendous. I interrupted you before when you were just clarifying some points, but you were going to talk about ambulance service as an example of the South African state failing.
You can't believe this stuff. You can't make it up, Dave. About 4 weeks ago, the ambulance service in Pretoria, the effective capital city, we have a strange arrangement where we have two, arguably three capital cities, but the effective one is Pretoria. So the capital city of what is by far the largest economy in Africa shut down its ambulance service. Simple as that. No ambulance. Got a heart attack? No ambulance.
Wow.
Simple. Broke your neck in a rugby accident? Sorry for you, buddy. No ambulance for this week. They shut it down over non-payments and disputes and money stolen and ANC guys up to no good. I mean, it doesn't end. As I said to you earlier, we've not had an intake this year for something like 50, for the first time in 56 years, a military intake. That is to say, we have 4 branches of military. That's the way our system works. Army, as everybody does. Navy, as everybody does. And Air Force, as everybody else does. But we also have a medical health leg. None of the 4 had an intake this year. And the first responsibility of government, anybody who understands political science knows that the first responsibility of government is the defense of the realm, more than anything else.
Now, is that I guess there's 3 things which I could think of might explain that. One is they are wanting deliberately, the government is wanting to downsize the military. 2 is that there's a complete lack of money and funds, and so while wanting a big military, they just can't pay for them. Or 3 is just the sheer gross incompetence of the organization.
It's the sheer gross incompetence of the people who are in charge, coupled with a tremendous decline in the tax base in South Africa. To give you some idea, the number of people on social grants in South Africa now is just sort of 18 million. Over the past few years, it's gone from something like 17.3 million to something like 17.9 million. Nobody's dead sure. The number of people who pay income tax in South Africa is 3.1 million, and there's a recent suggestion that it is now dipped beneath 3 million. That gives you a sense of perspective on the crisis in South Africa, whether the Sydney Morning Herald or the Durban Daily News or the Toronto Star or the Las Vegas Inquirer acknowledge it or not.
So the population of 58 million or so people in South Africa are being subsidized by around 3 million taxpayers.
Last year, the government, the year before, 2019, April, 2 reports were written in conjunction with one another. There were 2 sort of, sister reports, twin reports by the South African Social Security Agency and the Department of Statistics South Africa, in which they demonstrated 4 times over that, in fact, the population of South Africa is 85 million. They're just not admitting it. Yeah, it's not on Wikipedia. It's not on government sources. It's nowhere. But these 2 reports came out and people read them and they started comparing notes. And the government never, ever disavowed them.
Well, the last census was 2011, wasn't it? The last census was 10 years ago.
Oh, dear Dave, you've caught me flat-footed. Offhand, I can't think when it was.
I'm just Googling it, so I'm half confident in it. Well, I actually didn't use Google, used DuckDuckGo, but anyway.
Yeah, so do I, because it's not part of the satanic cabal.
And you know what? If if we take the most conservative, most outdated number possible from 2011, when it was around 57, 58 million people, 3 million taxpayers is still 3 million. 3 in 60 is still grossly inadequate to keep a state functional, let alone 3 in 80 million people. And then you have 1 in 10 of your millionaires, dollar millionaires, leaving the nation. It's just, it's certainly unsustainable. And I just, my heart breaks, and I'm sure your heart breaks for your nation too. And the powerlessness you must feel to save your nation and your neighbours from inevitable collapse, it seems. I don't know what it would take to turn it around. Obviously a complete change of government, but I'm not a complete change of government, and I'm not sure how that's possible without a complete change of culture.
Yeah, Dave, it's not going to happen. You know, people who know me well will stand up for me when I say that I have historically had a close association, much closer than any, you know, or 99 out of 100 white people, with the black people of South Africa. I lived in what is known as a black migrant labor hostel, a single men's working hostel, which is an experience that you cannot imagine in your own mind. So far, it's not my way to deprecate other races, but there is a simple reality here, whether you like it or not. Imagine I give you a fancy schmancy computer, and that computer has been designed by somebody like you, who understands what you understand, who has had a Western education like you have had, so on and so forth. You will use it to a certain level of competence. If I give it to somebody in an environment in which it has been proven 888,000 times that there is an IQ problem, apart from education, apart from nutrition, apart from everything, that there is a gene pool of cats that is slightly mentally weaker than most other cats. That those cats or those dogs or those human beings are going to struggle to operate that computer or that society or that banking system, whether you and I like it or not, whether we love people around us or not, whether we see the spirit of Christ in all people or not, whether we acknowledge as the most rabid right-wingers in the world or not, that it says in black and white in the Holy Scriptures of God Almighty that one of the apostles was a brown-skinned man, regardless of those things, or as George Bush would say, irregardless of those things. We are still left with a scenario in which it is impossible to rescue a society like South Africa's to the levels which people would hope for and expect for, whether it be crime or the efficacy of the implementation of administrative projects and programs, whether it is the functioning of the Department of Education or the Department of Health or whatever. When the raw human material with which you're working is so disparate, it's got nothing to do with hatred. We have a challenge in which a society was built on the back of apartheid, rightly or wrongly, was built on the back of apartheid at an extremely modern, Western, progressive, high level. And it is now being run by people who don't or not able to sustain that level of development and progress. With all of the love in the world, Dave, this thing can't be rescued. You can't turn it around. You can't go from a scenario in which you have 19%, 1 in 5 of the world's AIDS patients is in South Africa. There are 194 countries in the world, depends on which you count and which you don't count. 194, one country has 1 in 5 of the patients, because the people said that the government was lying when the government said that you mustn't have sex with too many people, you mustn't have unprotected sex, that AIDS is carried through semen and so on. They said the government is stupid, we know better. To fix that is it's like cleaning the Augean stables, and it's not going to happen.
It's very hard to hear. and again, you just want to find something to solve the problem. But the proof is in the pudding, and the nation is going the way it is. Amanda Grobler says, many of us expats still have family over there and worry about them day in and day out. Bo James Heyman asks this question, Simon, is it true that outside of the greater cities you need private security to travel?
Not in all of the places all of the time, by no means. And this is kind of one of these great ironies of South Africa, is that you can live perfectly safely forever and ever in certain places, but in other places you have to be fearful. Where I live, it's as safe as houses. But we've recently recorded our first 4 burglaries in 3 years, in the past 3 weeks. So this kind of trouble is spreading. Where my parents live is extremely safe. But where my sons and their mom live, which is in a leafy, pretty northern suburb of Johannesburg, for those of you who are familiar with it, it's Roosevelt Park, between Delta Park and Victory Park. Beautiful, exquisite area, lovely, near Emerentia Dam. They've been burgled and their entire house cleaned out twice. So it's in some areas are hopelessly unsafe to travel. You're crazy if you travel in daylight hours or during the dark. But there are other places where it's not so safe. And when I say places are unsafe, I'm not talking about in townships or bad areas. I'm talking about normal areas, ordinary areas, but which just happen to have become crime hotspots and where you would no longer let your wife pass any longer.
Wow. Liesl Peters says, we're so lucky to be in Australia, but have lots of family and friends in South Africa who can't get out, really fear for their safety and well-being. And somebody whose name I don't want to put on the screen says, God bless the Boers. And Anita Maguire, I'm not sure what this means. Yes, I've struck supposedly black South African children in Australia who speak French. I'm not sure what that's about. And Mama asks a question for you, Simon. What did Mandela do to solve the problems of South Africa?
That's a question that's far too deep to answer. There are 2 schools of thought there. The one was that he was a Trojan horse and nothing but a Trojan horse. There is ample evidence, particularly from the Institute for Race Relations, a notoriously and infamously liberal organization, which is now writing how what is happening in South Africa is the concluding period to a 60-year-long program of national democratic revolution, which is based upon a concept called colonialism of a special type. It's meant to emulate Leninist-style revolution, but in another way. There's another school of thought that says, no, we shouldn't be looking at all the negative. Nelson Mandela, if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have had a peaceful transition. We wouldn't have had peace for the past going on 27 years. It'll be 27 years on the 27th of April since there were first multiracial elections. So do we thank God for 27 years of peace, but rape and decline? Or do we say this was always a Trojan horse? It was always just another way of achieving communism in South Africa, which, by the way, the Institute for Race Relations doesn't base its allegations on opinion or conjecture. It bases them on original African National Congress documents that are being reiterated and re-endorsed and reaffirmed to this very day. In other words, the African National Congress will tell you through its own documents that we are hell-bent on communism in South Africa. So was he a bad guy for facilitating, like a wolf in sheep's clothing, like a pedophile priest in his cassock, this revolution? Or was he, thank God, the kind of interim measure that prevented all-out war 27, 28, 29, 30 years ago?
Pete asks, do you believe South Africa will be the next Zimbabwe? He's hoping not.
I do believe that South Africa will be one of the next Zimbabwe's. I won't give you a long sermon on all of the evidence, but there's certain things happening in our fiscal, financial, and economic sphere now that indicate that the government is going to have to resort to inflation to eradicate debt, and that inflation will get out of control. This is a scientific thing. It's not a matter of opinion. This is based on solid science. However, I don't believe that we are going to be the only ones. I don't want to get very far off the subject, but yesterday I watched a video featuring a man who is arguably the world's leading prognosticator, predictor, forecaster of economic trends or economic developments. A man by the name of Harry S. Dent Jr. being interviewed by Sky News Australia, in which he talks about something that we Suidlanders have been talking about for 2 years by way of comparison. That is to say, the $47 trillion unsustainable mortgage bubble in the Australian property market. It is a bubble which technically cannot be resolved. And there are technical reasons for it, in the same way that the $27 trillion OTC derivatives debt on the books of Deutsche Bank cannot be paid. It's not possible. Technically, you cannot pay it. So Deutsche Bank is staring into the abyss. The Australian housing market is staring into the abyss. Sooner or later, the chickens must come home to roost. And South Africa is staring into the abyss. I don't think we're unique, and I think that people fail.
We've just lost you right now. You last words I heard you say were you think people have failed. And
there you are. Sorry.
Video is frozen. Sorry. I can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying that Vladimir Putin has spoken very eloquently about this recently, and so has Vladimir Pozner. If anybody wants to look it up, Vladimir Pozner's keynote speech to the Yale Institute of Russian Studies.
Thank you. Look, final question before I let you go. I can see you hanging for a smoke.
No, I just had one, but yeah, it has been long.
Liesl Peters says, what can we do to help?
David, honestly, I don't think there's much. Sometimes when you give an answer like that, people say, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. There's always something you can do. I don't know what I can do if I see a concrete block falling from a 6-story window onto your head, plunging down to the crown of your head, other than say, Dave, you're going to be in big trouble very shortly. How do you fix this? By printing $1 trillion? By saying kumbaya? By immigrating to Australia, by buying more guns and preparing for a crisis in South Africa, as we Suidlanders are doing? I don't know. I don't have an answer for what appears to be an intractable, insoluble problem.
Right. Well, if you'd like to keep up with what's happening in South Africa and what Suidlanders is doing and making the world aware of, please head to their website, suidlanders.org. For those listening to the podcast, that's spelt SUIDLANDERS.org, suidlanders.org. Forgive me for my Australian attempt at your language, Simon. What's the well, I've had a couple of. Thank you. You're very kind. Look, Simon, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your local or somewhat local insights into the problems in Mozambique tonight. And I guess I just want to add my prayers for South Africa, that the government repents of its corruption and godlessness, that there is protection and justice for every citizen in South Africa, and that the state wouldn't fail And it would take a miracle for that to be the case, but we happen to be, I guess, fans of a miracle working God. So, I pray that something happens there, and certainly for protection for everybody in South Africa, that the government would not be the perpetrator, but the defender of the innocent going on there. We've got a couple of quick questions, and basically a lot of people saying, thank you very much, Simon, and they're offering to pray as well. Liesel says something which I'm assuming is in Boer, by Donkey, B-A-I-E, D-A-N.
Thank you very much is what it means.
Thank you very much. Okay, good. So thank you, and praying. So communism is always godless, Anita says, and she's going to be praying for you all. Not an exclusively Christian audience, but certainly a lot of Christians watching Pellowe Talk tonight and the Good Source regularly. I wish there was a happier note to end on, but I guess what we have to do is make sure we at home are as strong and politically healthy as possible, as economically and financially strong as possible, so that we can have a stable, flourishing base from which to be generous with the assistance that we can offer when it's requested and needed for foreign nations of all colours and languages. So, Simon, thank you very much for your time tonight. Hang around after I say goodbye to the audience, and we'll just have a quick chat backstage if that's all right.
That's fine. Thank you very much for having Saitlanders on your show again, Dave. It's a fantastic show. We appreciate it. We appreciate the quality of your show and the tone of your show, as a Christian show. So we like to come on it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. That's Simon Roche from Sightlanders, and that website is sightlanders.org. Now, don't forget, if you are enjoying this show for the first time tonight, well, I guess you can't forget because this is your first time. So if this is your first time, there's no paywall for the content on The Good Source. The Good Source and Pellowe Talk in particular is brought to you by The Good Source supporters. We're a website that's determined and designed to bring independent voices to you, producing them and bringing them not only in articles, but in videos and in podcasts as well. If you'd like to become a Good Source supporter, just head to the website, goodsource.news. There you can not only become a monthly or weekly financial contributor, but you can subscribe to the email updates. At this stage, nothing we do has a cost attached to it. It's all voluntary, free market. If we make it good enough, we hope you'll put your hand in your pocket and donate to keep it going. Also, don't forget to share the content that we produce. We're very heavily shadow banned and limited by the mainstream, by the corporate, the social media corporations. And so we're relying on people subscribing to our newsletter and sharing it with their friends when they see something that they like. So that's it for the show tonight. I want to again thank you very much for your time and your comments and your involvement in the show. And we hope that we will see you next week. Good night.
If not now, then when will we see an end to all this pain? Oh, it's not enough to do nothing. It's time for us to do something.